Officer Daniel Reyes had been driving the old service road past Millstone Creek just after midnight, his shift nearly over, when the headlights caught a flicker of red along the ditch. He thought it was a scrap of fabric at first, tossed from some reckless driver. But something made him stop. Maybe the way it moved, maybe the eerie stillness that followed. So he parked, flashlight in hand, and walked down the embankment, boots sinking into wet leaves, when he saw it. A tiny German shepherd puppy, curled in on itself, soaked in blood and trembling so violently its paws barely held its weight. Daniel dropped to his knees, heart clenched, thinking the worst. But as he reached out, the puppy let out a sound that wasn't a bark, not even a whimper, more like a breathless cry from somewhere too young and too broken to understand what had happened. Carefully, Daniel wrapped the pup in his duty jacket, whispering gently, "You're okay now, I got you," and stood to head back to his cruiser, when from the trees behind him came a sound that froze the blood in his veins. A scream. Not human. Not animal. Just wrong. Long, sharp, echoing off the pines in a way that made Daniel's skin crawl. He turned fast, flashlight beam jerking, but there was nothing. Only the wind pushing through branches, the night suddenly feeling much older than it should have been. He climbed into the cruiser, locking the doors, cradling the pup close as it shivered in his lap. The blood, he realized, wasn't all hers. Some of it had dried on the fur in wide smears, like she'd been pressed against something, or someone. He called it in, requesting backup, but couldn't explain why his voice shook more than it should. That night, in the emergency vet clinic, they worked on the pup for 2 hours. Lacerations on the leg, bruising around the ribs, signs of neglect, possibly abuse. But she lived. They named her Echo. The next morning, Daniel returned to the spot in daylight with 2 other officers. What they found made every man go silent. Just 50 yards from where Echo had been lying, half buried beneath a collapsed patch of brush, was an old makeshift kennel. Broken wood panels, barbed wire, and deep claw marks all across the inside walls, and behind it, a shallow grave. Small bones, scattered collars. One of the officers turned and threw up behind a tree. Daniel didn't speak. He just knelt, eyes on the dirt, and felt Echo's tiny paw wrap weakly around his finger from inside his jacket. That day changed him. He adopted her the moment the vet cleared her for release, raised her, trained her, loved her. And as Echo grew, so did something in her, a quiet knowing, a sharp awareness. She never barked unnecessarily, never flinched at thunder or sirens. But any time Daniel approached a home on a domestic call, Echo would stand between him and the doorway, body tense, eyes fixed, and more than once, she lunged before the officer even knocked, sniffing out hidden bruises, crying children, or the man holding a gun just behind the curtains. Echo wasn't just a rescue dog. She was a rescuer reborn. And sometimes, when Daniel stood in the woods alone, remembering that scream from the trees, he'd wonder if Echo hadn't only survived something evil, but carried with her the voice of every soul who didn't. Because from that night on, wherever she went, the silence seemed safer. 3 months after the night he found Echo bloodied in the ditch, Officer Daniel Reyes was a different man, quieter, more careful, more attuned to the silence between sounds. And Echo, now stronger, heavier and alert, had become more than just a dog at his side. She was a compass. On patrol, she read rooms before he did. At home, she paced the door 10 seconds before the phone rang. But most of all, it was in the woods she changed. Every time they neared Millstone Creek, Echo's body would stiffen, ears low, a deep growl rumbling through her chest, not of fear, but memory. Daniel avoided that stretch of forest now, or tried to. but something always pulled them back. It started with a call. Missing dog, rural edge of Briar Road, just a few miles from where Echo had been found. Normally not his case, but dispatch knew he'd want it. "You're the dog guy now?" they said. Daniel found the caller, a tearful teenage girl, saying her Labrador, Toby, had darted off the trail into the woods 3 nights ago, chasing a sound she couldn't describe. Not barking, like a baby crying. Echo tensed beside him. Daniel nodded and followed. 20 minutes into the trees, Echo stopped cold, nose lifted, muscles coiled. She bolted without warning, leash snapping taut, dragging Daniel forward as he shouted her name. But Echo was no longer hearing him. She was hearing something else. They reached a shallow gully littered with fallen branches, and there, wedged beneath a mound of dead leaves and a splintered beam of wood, was the dog Toby, alive but whimpering, leg pinned beneath a jagged board that looked suspiciously man-made. Daniel dropped to his knees, worked the wood off gently, wrapped the dog in his jacket and checked for tags. He was shaking badly, but breathing. But Echo wasn't looking at him. She was locked on the slope above them, body still, tail rigid. Daniel followed her gaze. Behind a curtain of hanging vines, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it, was a rusted metal door embedded in the hillside, half buried, streaked with soot. Daniel's breath caught. It looked like a storm shelter, but older. He approached cautiously, Echo staying at his side now, her growl low and steady. The door was chained from the outside, recently. With gloves, he removed the padlock, pulled the door open, and was hit by a smell that made his stomach twist. Damp, Moldavian metal. And beneath it, something sharp, something wrong. He shined his flashlight down. Stairs, a dirt floor, and in the far corner, crates, wire kennels, old chains, water bowls, a frayed, chewed-up leash still hooked to the wall. Evidence, clear as day. A second hidden kennel, underground, unreported, still intact. Daniel radioed it in, heart pounding. As he stepped inside, Echo whined, just once, and then barked sharply, staring toward the far corner. Daniel turned the light and saw it. A child's stuffed bear, torn open, its eye hanging by a thread, placed gently in the kennel like a comfort offering. Then came a sound, soft, distant. Not from the woods, from beneath them, like someone knocking, from below. Daniel's breath caught. There was more. Echo stepped forward, placing a paw gently on the ground, and barked again. Louder, urgently, because she remembered. She knew, and she wasn't going to let another voice go unheard. By the time backup arrived, Daniel had already found the hidden hatch beneath the kennel floor, already descended into the cold crawl space lined with child-sized blankets and scratched walls. There were no living children, but there were names, etched in the dirt, whispered on cassette tapes left behind in an old recorder, frantic voices, scared voices, forgotten voices, all left in the dark, but now heard again. Because of a dog who refused to forget, Echo didn't just survive that night in the ditch. She survived for them. And now, she was bringing their stories into the light. The tapes recovered from the bunker beneath the hidden kennel weren't labeled, but the voices on them were unmistakably young. Some no older than 8, whispering songs, talking to the silence, or simply breathing through fear. The forensics team counted 5 distinct voices. Echo sat beside the table during every review session, still and alert, her ears twitching at certain sounds like she remembered them. She had begun refusing to enter Daniel's car at night if he parked near the station. She'd pace around it, nose pressed to the air, then whimper and stare toward the forest. Daniel trusted her completely now. She had never been wrong. So when she did it, a third night in a row, standing rigid near the edge of the woods behind the old Delman property, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed his flashlight, radioed his location, and followed her. The Delman house had been abandoned since 2005 after a fire gutted the interior. The land behind it sloped into overgrown woods that hadn't seen a mower in decades. Echo weaved through the brush like she'd been there before. Daniel pushed past tangled vines until he saw what she'd found, an old hatch in the ground. But this one wasn't rusted shut. It was freshly used, the edges scraped clean, the latch oiled. He knelt and listened. Nothing. Then Echo let out a low growl. Daniel opened it slowly. Beneath, a ladder dropped into darkness. He radioed in again. Backup requested. Location pinned. Then he went down. The air below was damp and sour, thick with rot and mildew. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, carved from stone and earth, lit only by a dying string of old bulbs stapled into the wall. And there, at the far end, was a door, wooden, reinforced. Daniel moved toward it, Echo at his heel. As he reached for the handle, he heard it. A voice, faint, hoarse, crying, "Please!" Daniel threw the door open. Inside, chained to a cot and barely able to lift her head, was a girl, maybe 14, starved, shaking, alive. Echo rushed to her, whimpering, pressing against her gently. The girl reached up, hand trembling, and whispered, "She's the one who cried with me. I heard her that night." Daniel's chest went tight. "Echo," the girl nodded. "I was underground. I thought I was dreaming, but she cried, and I cried back." Rescue units arrived minutes later. The girl's name was Rachel. Missing 2 years, her family had moved twice, their search ignored. She was declared a runaway. But Echo never forgot. The blood she carried when Daniel found her wasn't just her own. It was Rachel's. They had been together once, trapped, lost, separated by darkness, but connected by sound. And now, 2 years later, Echo had come back for her. Because rescue isn't always a moment. Sometimes it's a return. Rachel spent the first few days barely speaking, her voice a whisper, worn from years of screaming into silence. Echo never left her side, even curling up on the hospital floor, head on Rachel's foot, ears flicking at every hallway noise. Daniel watched them from the doorway, knowing instinctively that Echo had brought something back in Rachel that doctors and detectives never could. On the 4th night, Rachel finally said it. A name, Joseph Silman. A man no one had heard from in years, but Daniel remembered the name. Barely. A former contractor, arrested once in the 90s for assault. Charges dropped after the victim disappeared. Rachel said he used to wear gloves made of old leather, spoke gently right before hurting someone, and always played the same music before locking the door. A broken lullaby on cassette. Echo reacted to the name, ears rising, body tense. That night, Daniel dug into archived records, tracking down every property Silman had ever owned or worked on. One hit caught him off guard. A storage facility, still under his name, just outside city limits. He didn't wait for backup this time. He loaded Echo into the cruiser and drove straight there. The lot was fenced, overgrown with weeds, units long since abandoned. Several had padlocks rusted into place, but one was different. Recent tracks in the gravel, a fresh boot print. Daniel unholstered his weapon and approached the unit, silent. Echo stood still, then growled, low, slow, rising like a siren before the storm. He cut the lock and rolled the door open. The smell hit first, not rot, but metal, copper, something sharp. The inside of the unit had been turned into a chamber of some kind, part bunker, part cell. Mattresses lined one wall, all stained. Wires dangled from the ceiling, old toys sat stacked in a crate. A single chair bolted to the floor faced a screen, and behind it, a wall of photos, all Polaroids. Young faces, some smiling, some terrified, all of them missing. Then Echo lunged, not in panic, but direction. She jumped toward the back wall, clawed at the metal. She was barking, sharp and fast. Daniel pulled the crate aside, revealing a vent, and from behind it came the smallest sound. Breathing. He tore it open. Inside was a girl, curled up, tiny, barely alive, eyes wide but unafraid when they saw Echo. She whispered. She was there the first time. I remember her bark. It was the final proof. The man they were hunting had moved the girls across properties, keeping them like ghosts, silencing them one by one. But he hadn't silenced Echo, and now she was finding them. The girl from the storage unit was 8. Her name was Mia, and she hadn't spoken a full sentence since the rescue, just fragments, but all of them pointed in the same direction, a place she called the Red House, a building with no windows and floors that squeaked even when you didn't move. Daniel showed her satellite images of nearby properties, and she flinched when one appeared. An old farmhouse in the hills, painted red, surrounded by trees. Daniel recognized it instantly, abandoned since 2009, originally owned by the Silman family before being lost in foreclosure. Echo stared at the photo, then growled, a short, sharp bark, like she'd just recognized a scent through the screen. They didn't wait. They moved at first light. Daniel didn't bring backup this time, not because he didn't believe he'd need it, but because he didn't want to risk Echo's instinct being drowned by protocol. The drive was long, up winding dirt roads, trees folding overhead like ribs closing around a heart. When they reached the Red House, Echo stood at the passenger door without being told to stay back. She just watched the front door, body locked, ears forward. No tail wag, no sniffing, just pure readiness. Daniel stepped onto the porch and knocked. Nothing. Then again, his hand moved to the handle, unlocked. The door creaked inward. A smell hit him. Dust, wood, old cloth, and underneath it, something familiar, leather. Daniel drew his weapon. Echo followed, quiet as a shadow. The floor creaked with every step, just like Mia said. Down the hallway, Daniel saw them. Hooks in the walls, markings scratched into the paint, toys scattered like breadcrumbs. The far door at the end was closed. He moved slowly, breath shallow, gun raised, then a scream, a real one. High, ragged female. Behind the door, Daniel kicked it in. Inside was a narrow room, dimly lit by a flickering bulb. A woman was chained to a beam, blood on her wrists, tears on her face. And standing beside her, turning toward the sound, was a man with a blade, thin, grey-haired, expressionless, Silman. Before Daniel could react, Echo launched. She hit him in the side, taking him to the ground with a snarl so loud it stopped Daniel's breath. He ran to the woman, undid the cuffs, pulled her to the hallway, while Echo held the man, her teeth at his throat, but not biting. Just pinning, controlling, waiting. Daniel turned back, voice firm. Off, Echo obeyed in a heartbeat, stepping back but staying between Silman and the exit. Silman was arrested without another word. No resistance, no explanation, just silence, and the weight of dozens of unsolved files finally falling into place. Later that night, Daniel sat on the precinct steps, Echo at his feet. He looked down at her. No collar, just eyes full of everything she'd seen, everything she'd remembered. "You weren't just trying to survive that night," he whispered. "You were waiting for the chance to go back." And she had, because some dogs don't just escape evil, they chase it down. So no one else has to.